So Terence Crawford stops Shawn Porter in round 10 after Kenny Porter throws in the towel. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Of course, for those who know, I'm referring to my pre-fight prediction where I predicted that Terence Crawford would stop Shawn Porter in round 9 or 10, probably on his feet. And so, look, enough kissing of my own ass. Let's actually talk about this fight. This, I thought, was a really good fight. Now, it wasn't necessarily a war, not like, I don't know, Keith Thurman versus Shawn Porter, or even Shawn Porter versus Errol Spence. This was very much a boxing match. And I think early on, I don't want to say the writing was on the wall, but based on the first round, you could see that this was the kind of fight that Terence Crawford wanted, where he spent most of the time in the centre ring having Shawn Porter at a distance. And now Shawn Porter's no slouch. He can fight at a distance, but against Terence Crawford, it's a very tough ask because, as I touched on in the pre-fight video, this is a consensus recognised top 3 pound-for-pound fighter in the entire sport. So this is a very accomplished technician, and I think it showed early and throughout the course of the fight. So I was very impressed with both men, especially Terence Crawford, but also Shawn Porter, because he's not someone who myself and many other people associate with technique. He doesn't have awful technique, but it leaves a bit to be desired, both defensively and offensively, but he makes up for it by having a lot of tenacity and intensity and athleticism. But in this fight, I feel like we saw some very refined technique from Shawn Porter. He was a bit more educated. He still had the urgency, but he had a bit more education when it came to coming forward and trying to pressure Terence Crawford. But unfortunately, even though, in my opinion, he had improved his technique, it still wasn't good enough. And Crawford, I have to say, was just absolutely blistering. The pace and just the sharpness of Terence Crawford in this fight really was something to behold. And I think you notice it more in contrast to the Kell Brook fight and the Kavaliauskas fight, because even though Terence Crawford stopped both of those guys, the performances were almost workmanlike. He almost looked a bit flat. And I even remember in the Kavaliauskas fight, after that one, people were starting to ask the question, is Terence Crawford on the decline? Has he peaked, and is he now on the downward slope? I never thought so, because I always rated Kavaliauskas. I always saw that as being a hard fight for Crawford. But then you see this fight and you see how much sharper he looked, and I think it's quite clear why. It's because he knew that he couldn't afford to look less than stellar against Shawn Porter. Because even though Shawn Porter's not champion, he's a dangerous challenger, he's a dangerous contender who will run you to the limit if you aren't on your A game. But also, what does Shawn Porter bring? He brings a resume where he's pushed the other best guys in the division very close indeed. We're talking about split decision win and loss to Yordenis Ugas and Errol Spence respectively. And so Terence Crawford understood that, okay, this guy's been in there with all my contemporaries who I'm trying to fight. I have to perform in a way that they can't ignore me. They have to fight me if they hope to say that they're better than me. And that's precisely what he did. Shawn Porter, he was drawn into a boxing match, as I say, but he did try his old tactics of roughing a guy up, for lack of a better term. And to some degree, he had some success. He was able to kind of catch Terence Crawford with some punches here and there. Sometimes Terence Crawford was just a bit too tall. He wasn't, with Shawn Porter, he's a short guy for the weight, so he's able to get under and he kind of loops his shots around. And he had some success, but for the most part, Terence Crawford was able to slot in some pretty sharp, nice counters to both head and body. And I think early on, he really stamped his authority on the fight. And you could see it in Shawn Porter's face, because I think as early as the second round, his eyes were already starting to swell a little bit. And on top of that, I remember watching the third round in particular, and there was a clinch at in the closing seconds of the round, and they broke. And the body language and the expression on Porter's face, he looked almost dejected a little bit. And I think he realized early on that this was unlike anyone he's ever been in with before. Someone with the speed, the accuracy, the skill to almost hit him at will. Because Porter, he had some decent defensive technique in this fight. But Terence Crawford, he just understands positioning. He understands the art of boxing, the science of boxing so well that even though Shawn Porter's, he's putting all this energy into moving his head and trying to get out of the way of the shots, Terence Crawford, he understands. He's like, oh, no, yeah, I'll get you moving. And as soon as you go to the defensive position you want, that's where I've tailored my offense to. And you see it constantly where Shawn Porter was bobbing and weaving. And as soon as he felt like he was in the clear and he'd successfully evaded a shot, Terence Crawford had hit him. It's because Terence Crawford understands misdirection. He understands bluffing, because that's what boxing is. And so it was a great performance, in my opinion, from both guys, especially Terence Crawford. And it was great. A real good fight, in my opinion. There were 2 knockdowns in round 10, in the round the fight was stopped. And those pretty much panned out exactly as I envisaged they would before the fight, where I think particularly the first one, where Terence Crawford timed Porter coming in with a southpaw left uppercut, and it just sent Porter onto the seat of his pants. And you could see that he was very disappointed, because it wasn't necessarily the most hurtful shot, but it was just the holes in his technique as he's coming forward. He just kept getting timed by someone so sharp as Terence Crawford. And then even the second knockdown, you could see how disappointed Porter was, because he was banging the canvas. How did I let that happen? Well, that's what happens when you have this kind of underdeveloped, almost reckless way of coming forward, and you're in against a guy like Terence Crawford, who he can fight going backwards as well as he can going forwards. And the stoppage, because Kenny Porter, he got onto the ring apron, he waved the white towel, he called it a day. A lot of people, I don't want to say find it controversial, but it's definitely a topic for discussion. And now I can understand why, because in the context, Shawn Porter's never been stopped before. He's been in tough fights. He's no stranger to it. But typically, you do have to consider that even in his tough fight, Shawn Porter does tend to give as good as he gets. Whereas in this fight, his successful offense was kind of few and far between. And so, and on top of that, he hadn't really stamped his authority in the fight. He was in it, but you always felt that Terence Crawford was in control and had even more gears to go through. And so Kenny Porter knows his son better than any of us. So maybe he's just seen enough. Personally, I'd always like to see a guy see out a round. Unless he's getting completely pummeled, that's a different story. But let him see out the round. Give him a pep talk. Say, look, if you have another round like that, I'm pulling the plug on this. So go and show me something. That's just my opinion, That's just my opinion. So the stoppage wasn't terrible, but I would have seen... It's Shawn Porter's last title fight. And they kind of knew that going in. That was kind of one of the taglines to this fight. So at least let him see out the round. Maybe even the fight. Say he can go to points, but Terence Crawford is a mean finisher. And he just dropped him twice. So maybe that's a bit of a stretch. So the stoppage, touch on that. Another thing is Errol Spence. Now, he was in attendance as you'd expect him to be. But from what I've seen on the broadcast and what people have spoken about, is Errol Spence left the building once the fight had stopped. Now, in my opinion, that is a bad look. I'm going to go as far as saying that was a bitch move. Because, look, correct me, forgive me if I'm missing context. And if there is missing context, please leave it in the comments. I'm happy to admit that I don't know the full picture if there is one. But just to paint this picture as I see it, Errol Spence, for years now, has been saying, I can't fight Terence Crawford. He's on the wrong side of the street. insinuating that there's a promotional issue. It's politics getting in the way of the fight. So he has to cross the street. He has to come over to PBC and I'll fight him. That is BS in itself. But I can't say that it's strictly Errol Spence doing that, because that happens throughout boxing, throughout all the weight classes, unfortunately. And so that's I take issue with that. But now, in the lead up to this fight, there were rumours that Terence Crawford would leave Bob Arum in Top Rank. And it's been confirmed now the fight has happened. They've parted ways. So there's no longer that political barrier stopping Crawford and Spence from fighting. And as I say, the rumours were there leading up to the fight. Hatman even did a video on it. Apparently Teddy Atlas was basically the first person, or the first high profile person in boxing to basically say it, that Terence Crawford planned to leave Top Rank. But that barrier's gone now. You should be in the ring if you're Errol Spence, because Terence Crawford has just beaten the best guy on your resume, and he's done it in more convincing fashion than you did. You should be in the ring saying, okay, you think you're bad, you think you're the best in the division, prove it. Let's fight. You know, there's no political barrier anymore. There's no promotional conflict. We can make the fight. You want to prove how good you are? Let's go. He didn't do that. He left the building. I do not like that at all. And as I say, in my opinion, that's a bitch move. I don't like that at all. And that's been a trend I've seen with Errol Spence. And I think a lot of people, Hatman once again, has picked up on it. This guy, Errol Spence, when he was leading up to his title fight and when he beat Kell Brook for the title, it looked like the world was his oyster. All he had to do was carry on doing what he was doing, carry on learning, carry on grinding like he was, dealing with the fighters he was fighting in the fashion he was, and sooner or later, you know, he'd hit the big time. He'd be the man. But no, he became a champion, became lax, he was fighting opposition that he didn't necessarily want to fight, and he got involved with Broner and the Charlos and Tank Davis. We know what those guys are like, especially Tank Davis and Broner. Acting a fool, turning up drunk. Obviously had that car accident, which was, like, forgive me if I'm wrong, but was he drunk? Was that a driving under the influence? I don't know. I think it was. Correct me if I'm wrong. But nevertheless, his dedication it stalled and maybe even declined. And once again, this is your contemporary, this is your rival. None of this business about, you know, across the street, that's out of the way now. You should be squaring up to him, saying, look, good win, champ. Let's get on. Unify 3 of the belts. But no, left the building. So, anyway, this is Terence Crawford's post-fight video. Amazing performance. I'm actually going to go out on a limb here and I say that, I think Terence Crawford is the best in the division. I said that before this fight. I think, and I've thought this for a long time, that he actually beats Errol Spence. Don't get me wrong, I still want to see the fight. I'm not one of these fans where, I think he beats him, so he doesn't have to fight him. No. Just because I think he beats him doesn't mean he does. He has to prove it. But from what I've seen of both guys, I actually think that in this point in time, Yordenis Ugas is a tougher fight for Terence Crawford. I'd still pick him to beat Ugas, but I think he presents a tougher time, a tougher challenge than Errol Spence does right now. Let me know. You know, some of you might disagree with that. That's fine. That's just my interpretation. Let me know what you think. So, if Terence Crawford can't fight Errol Spence for whatever reason, fight Ugas. It's just as good. That's another champion. So, yeah, just a little touch on what's coming next, or potentially coming next. I'm going to close this video out now. Great performance from both men. Credit to Terence Crawford for the victory, the first man to stop Shawn Porter. But also, Shawn Porter, I wish him all the best in retirement. He's announced his retirement. And it's good to see, because he's achieved a lot. He's a former 2-time champion. Always given a great account of himself against the best guys in his division. This is a guy who's been fighting at the top for a long time. And he's always turned up in shape, ready to go, ready to rumble, and always left it all in the ring. So I wish him all the best. He's always come across as a nice guy, very pleasant, but very intense and a very serious competitor in the ring, which is what we love to see. you know, from our modern day gladiators. So yeah, credit to both guys. Let me know what you thought of this fight and what you think of my assessment of this fight in the comment section below. Do you agree, disagree, or do you think I've missed out? Leave it all down below. I'll get back to you. Keep an eye out for the study of this fight. Can't wait to break this fight down for you guys. Gonna get a copy. We'll have a good dig, see what we can find. And also the profile of a prospect fights videos rather. Keep an eye out for those. They'll be coming soon. I think you guys are going to like this series. So make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for listening, guys, and I'll catch you in the next video.